There is a new bombshell allegation in the Epstein files that dead bodies are buried on one of the deceased financier's famous properties. We are going through the allegations, the launch of a new investigation, and I'm going to bring on a professional coroner to discuss, is this even possible? Can the alleged bodies be found and properly examined? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Jeffrey Epstein has been called a lot of things, and he has been accused of a lot of things. But killer? Being responsible for the cover-up of violent deaths? That would be a new one. But I gotta say, what are we supposed to make of these new allegations coming out of the Epstein files? Because as you may know, we've been covering as best as we can the existing files that were released from the Department of Justice. And something came out that we got to talk about. Buried in the millions and millions of pages, there is an email that has now stood out for a very dark reason. There is an email from November 2019. It's directed to an Edward Aragon. According to KOB4, he's a local radio host. The other names are redacted in this email, but this is what it says, quote, Edward, this is sensitive, so it'll be the first and last email depending on your discretion. You can choose to take it or trash it, but this comes from a person that has been there and seen it all as a former staff at the Zorro. The material below was taken from Jeffrey Epstein's home as my insurance in case of future litigation against Epstein. Sorry, no questions. What is damning about Jeffrey Epstein is yet to be written. Did you know somewhere in the hills outside the Zorro, 2 foreign girls were buried on orders of Jeffrey and Madam G? Both died by strangulation during rough fetish sex. And there even appear to be links to purported sex videos, including one that says sex video with minor. And then it goes on to say, please arrange for 1 Bitcoin BTC by 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, Thursday, 11/22/19, to the BTC wallet address. That's redacted. The USB will be sent anonymously to your attention by overnight courier upon receipt of the funds. You have my assurance this is exclusive, never shared before, no attorneys, no samples, no questions, please confirm ASAP. So Zorro, by the way, is referring to Zorro Ranch. It's about 30 miles south of Santa Fe, New Mexico. We've talked about this Epstein property before. We had found evidence that upon Epstein's death, he wanted this property, along with all of his major properties, to go to Karina Shuliak, his purported secret girlfriend. This is in trust documents and will documents. Now, Epstein, based on the reporting here, apparently purchased the 7,500-acre property from former New Mexico Governor Bruce King in 1993. And there were several civil lawsuits that accused Epstein of sexually assaulting girls at this property. It was dubbed the Playboy Ranch, where Epstein, in fact, is accused of sexually abusing a 16-year-old girl as early as 1996. And for example, you have this unsealed 2016 court deposition where the Epstein accuser, renowned Epstein accuser, Virginia Giuffre, testified that Ghislaine Maxwell ordered her to give the late former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson a massage at the ranch. Now, this radio host, Aragon, said that he got this message anonymously. He sent the email to the FBI, which is why, by the way, it was in the Epstein files to begin with, why it was released from the DOJ. And he indicated that he didn't pay this person, which when you think about 1 Bitcoin back in the day was reportedly worth about $8,000 at the time. And he indicated that while he spoke to an FBI agent, he never heard anything more from it, didn't know the status of the investigation. Now, let me be clear about something, okay? We couldn't find more corroborating evidence to support this claim that, they're dead bodies somewhere in the area of this ranch or on the ranch. We don't know if these allegations are true. But if they are true, when would this have happened? We don't know that either. But apparently, I will tell you, this ranch, this claim, is being taken seriously. And in a little bit, I'm going to be bringing on a professional coroner to determine what can we expect here? What potential evidence could be left behind? How can you even find a body? What will be left to actually examine? How much can we tell here? But the reason that we're even bringing a coroner on and talking about this is because this claim is getting serious attention. You have New Mexico's Land Commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, who sent a letter to the New Mexico Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office requesting a full investigation. According to KOB4, Epstein had apparently leased land around this ranch from the state land office, did it through a company called Cypress Inc., but Garcia Richard ended that lease in light of what happened with Epstein. And in a further escalation, the Chief Deputy Attorney General, James Grayson, said the Department of Justice is taking these allegations seriously, only has so much information right now to go forward with because they're working to try to get the original documents to try to verify these accusations. Grayson saying, quote, "As we understand it, the allegations appear to be unsubstantiated and stem from an anonymous individual referencing events that purportedly occurred more than 6 years ago. We will work to obtain the original unredacted emails and any underlying files, as access to complete and authentic materials is critical to our assessment and planning. These circumstances raise significant concerns regarding the reliability, authenticity, and credibility of the claims. Notwithstanding those concerns, we are prepared to review and assess any verifiable information should it be provided through appropriate and lawful means." Stephanie Garcia Richard saying, quote, "It is our responsibility to manage this land, and if it was being used for nefarious purposes, if it was being used for criminal purposes, we need to know." All right, before we move on, I gotta give a quick shout out to our partner, CyberGhost VPN. Look, have you ever hesitated to connect to public Wi-Fi, like in a restaurant, airport, work, school, because you're afraid someone might steal your information? It's totally reasonable. The truth is, eyes are watching you every time you go online, but that's why we got CyberGhost VPN. You can select one of their hundreds of locations before you browse, and they will encrypt everything through their secure servers. This way, no one can track your online activity. It works on up to 7 devices at once, so you can share with family and friends. And with just a couple clicks, CyberGhost unlocks exclusive geo-restricted content from over 40 major streamers like Netflix and Prime. With over 38 million users worldwide and a nearly perfect rating on Trustpilot, CyberGhost is one of the most recommended VPNs out there. And look, if you're still not sure, there's a 45-day money-back guarantee, an 84% discount, plus 4 months free with the link in my description. That is just $2.03 a month to protect your privacy and enjoy unlimited content. So don't wait. Click the link in the description. Start browsing safely with CyberGhost VPN. Stay private, stay secure, unlock global content. Get CyberGhost VPN now with 84% off plus 4 months free, risk-free with a 45-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description and start protecting your digital life today. Now, in some latest reporting, the New Mexico Department of Justice apparently sent a letter to the feds seeking the unredacted copies of this email, and you had the New Mexico Department of Justice Chief of Staff Lauren Rodriguez telling Source New Mexico in a statement, quote, "While we have not yet received a response to our letter sent last Friday, we are reviewing all appropriate avenues to investigate the allegations raised, as well as any additional ones that may emerge. We also continue to engage with the Truth Commission leadership to ensure coordinated communication and meaningful participation in the ongoing fact-finding mission." I'm going to talk about the Truth Commission in a minute. Now, back to Garcia Richard. She said in an interview, while the state land office sent hundreds of pages of Zorro Ranch leasing records to the New Mexico Attorney General in 2019, Garcia Richard said, "I have a lot of frustration that we are now 7 years beyond the initial cancellation of the leases, and to my knowledge, not one member of law enforcement has investigated the ranch or state land." And in her letter to the DOJ, she added, "We are fully committed to assisting with an investigation in any way possible, including providing access to state lands adjacent to the former Zorro Ranch." So assuming, these bodies are really buried, where exactly are they buried? You even had U.S. Representative Melanie Stansberry, who issued a video-recorded statement.
"I spent a fair amount of my time this morning looking at the files on Zorro Ranch. There's some dark stuff there, and I think it's really important that our colleagues, State House Representatives Mariana Anaya and Andrea Romero, are conducting this Truth Commission, because the FBI never did a full forensic investigation of the ranch property, and it's clear that crimes were committed there, and people knew about it. There were victims who went to the FBI, who went to law enforcement, and those crimes were never followed up on, and the ranch was sold from the estate before a full investigation could be done. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, what went down there, why it was not fully investigated, why people were not held accountable. And frankly, as a New Mexican, to anyone who was hurt there, my heart goes out to you.
Guess what happened yesterday? New Mexico lawmakers on Monday, they passed legislation to launch a full-scale investigation here. You have a committee of both Republicans and Democrats who are going to have subpoena power. They're going to try to get testimony from survivors of the alleged abuse that happened at this ranch and local residents to testify, all at the state capitol. So the person who maybe sent that 2019 email, will they come forward? I don't know. But according to Reuters, this probe is going to cost about $2.5 million, reportedly funded through a settlement between the AG's office and financial services companies for failing to address the alleged abuses at this property. And the idea is here, they want to transform the law. They want to amend the law that may have allowed Jeffrey Epstein to allegedly operate the way he's accused of operating at this property. And the preliminary findings are due in July. There's a full final report that's going to be due by year's end. And you have to wonder, is it going to include allegations about dead bodies? Representative Andrea Romero, she said that they're going to use subpoenas and public records and testimonies, quote, to put the whole story together. And in a statement following the vote to launch all this, Romero said that, quote, New Mexicans deserve to know the truth about what went on at the Zorro Ranch and who knew about it. We have heard years of allegations and rumors about Epstein's activities in New Mexico, but unfortunately, federal investigators have failed to put together an official record. With this Truth Commission, we can finally fill in the gaps by investigating the failures that led to the horrific allegations of abuse and crime at Zorro Ranch, so we can learn from them and prevent such atrocities from taking place in our state going forward. This is a complication, maybe a complication, gotta mention it. So while the 1,200 acres that were previously leased by Epstein's company is still public and unleased, this is according to Garcia Richard, guess who owns the actual ranch today? The family of Texas businessman and politician Donald Hofheinz. It was bought in 2023 by an LLC. This LLC was apparently created just 1 month before. And Hofheinz is actually running for statewide comptroller's office. And according to the New Mexican, the Zorro Ranch was renamed the San Rafael Ranch, located at San Rafael Road. By the way, what was the purchase price? Reportedly, it was listed in 2021 for over $27 million, but the sales price may have dropped to $18 million. We don't know what it was actually bought for. Although I will tell you, there's a side note. The LLC made the argument, given the ties to Epstein, along with a lower sales price, that's why it was actually valued at only $13.4 million in 2023 for tax purposes. Interesting side note. By the way, public business filings apparently indicated that at one point, Hofheinz's son, Colin, was the manager of the LLC. Then you had Alan Blakemore, spokesperson for the family, who released a statement saying, 4 years after Mr. Epstein's death, the Hofheinz family purchased property in New Mexico listed at public auction, whose proceeds benefited his victims. Prior to the auction listing, they had never visited the property. Now, I will tell you this. The Hofheinz family did indicate that they would fully cooperate with this New Mexico investigation if authorities wanted to search the property. That's big. And it is being reported that the feds haven't even searched this ranch as of December 2019. So one of the things that's come out is you had the former AG, Hector Balderas, wrote a letter to then U.S. Attorney John Anderson in October of 2019 about a joint investigation. Quote, my office has been actively investigating and assisting other state and federal agencies with their investigations related to criminality perpetrated in New Mexico by Jeffrey Epstein. And Balderas wrote and requested that the United States Attorney's Office, quote, explore initiating the process to seize Epstein's New Mexico land holdings. But now all these years later, it's coming up again. And by the way, Zorro Ranch, it came up quite a bit in the Epstein files. Several photographs released in the Epstein files show women or girls, their faces apparently redacted at Zorro Ranch. I'll give you an example. In the files, there's a 2015 itinerary, or that's what it appears to be, presumably for Epstein, and it says Saturday, August 1st, 2015, Zorro. Sunday, August 2nd, 2015, Zorro, San Francisco. Reminder, late into the island today, 11:18 a.m., depart Zorro, 12:18 p.m., arrive San Jose. There's a lot of correspondence regarding the ranch, too, in the Epstein files. In fact, it appears the ranch is mentioned over 4,000 times. A lot of the correspondence between 2012 and 2018. You have the ranch as the sender or receiver in emails. There's even an email signature that says Zorro Management LLC. So with all that in mind, what would it take for there to be an excavation of potential bodies on this property? And if bodies are found, what would it show? That's what I want to talk about. Okay, so I want to bring on Richland County Coroner, Dr. Nada Rutherford. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's good to see you. Okay, this is a big allegation. We don't know if this is true. Obviously, we're talking about the fact that now an investigation is being launched into this property. You know, it's about sexual abuse allegations, but who knows what else they might be able to find during the course of this if they have residents and you know, survivors speak out about what they saw. What would it take for authorities to actually go around the property and try to excavate to find bodies? Let's start right there.
First of all, you have New Mexico. The terrain there is going to be extremely difficult. It's dry, it's rugged terrain, it's rough. So any excavation that's going to happen, they're going to need to have some idea about where this could possibly take place on this property, unless they're going to dig up the entire property, which is not very prudent of them. So they would need some sort of ground penetrating devices that could help to look and see if there's some sort of grave there, if they put this person in a box, if they buried them with something special that's not supposed to be in the ground naturally. So they're going to need a lot of technology first before they just go digging around this property.
And it's a big property. It's a big property. And this allegation is not even clear about when these people were allegedly buried there, which makes me wonder, even if you were digging, what could you potentially find? What would be left over?
You're going to have skeletal remains at this point. These allegations purport that this happened so long ago. And so not only did they say that these are possibly minors, so you have smaller bodies that are potentially buried. You have scavengers that are in this area, again, animals that are indigenous to this area that are, again, it is very hard to dig a grave unless you have special equipment. So, and especially on that type of terrain. So did they have special equipment? We know that, supposedly these people have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources. So if they tapped into those resources, they could have done this properly. But again, that's why the technology piece of this is going to be so important, to be able to see where they could have possibly buried someone. And then the amount of time that has passed, it's going to be grown over. You're not going to be able to see, freshly disturbed ground as you would for someone who has maybe been recently buried. And so again, this is going to take a long time. And those excavation efforts are probably just going to reveal skeletal remains, which then you're going to have to extract DNA from possibly the femur bones. And then who are these supposed minors that were there? Do their families know that they're missing? Where were they trafficked from? So not only are you trying to pinpoint country of origin, possibly, since they said that these minors were possibly from foreign countries, now you're going to have to try to track down family utilizing DNA. Skeletal remains, again, you look at the femur bone, you're trying to gather the DNA from there, but what else could you do? Dental records and things, but you must know the identity of the person in order to be able to do that.
Can you elaborate on that? So even if they find remains, you're saying it could be very, very difficult to establish A, identity, but B, cause and manner of death?
Absolutely. Unless they did something that affected the skeleton of the person, soft tissue injuries are not going to be readily apparent in someone who has been buried, especially if they've been buried for a really long time. That soft tissue eventually becomes desiccated and goes away. It goes back to the earth. And so you're not going to see much. So unless they were blunt force trauma, stabbed, shot, something like that, you may not see those things. You could see broken bones potentially, but again, how well preserved is the skeleton? And that's going to be very important. How quickly were these persons supposedly buried? Again, lots of allegations, lots of speculation, but if you are searching for bones, then you're going to need technology to look over all of that terrain.
So in other words, if we take these allegations as true that you had these girls die as a result of strangulation, it may be very difficult to actually see that.
Yes, it will. And again, how well was the body preserved before burial? Meaning the hyoid bone, which is located here in the neck, it's a protected bone, but usually that's what we see broken in someone who has died from strangulation. And so you'll see that piece again of the hyoid bone broken off, but you also see soft tissue injury. So if the body is not well preserved, then you're not going to see those things. And again, after all this time, all of that soft tissue is going to be gone. So in a regular autopsy where we suspect strangulation, you're going to see petechial hemorrhaging. You're going to see bleeding within the strap muscles of the neck. You're going to see that damage that happens from someone being strangled. But in skeletons, you don't see those things, again, unless there is severe blunt force injury to that area. And again, small, tiny bones. You have insects and things that are going to feed on the body when it's buried. And so, again, you may lose a lot of that evidence.
A couple of questions about that, and I apologize if you're repeating yourself. I just want to clarify. Is there any way to determine the age, whether it's from an anthropologist coming in or looking at the, like you said, maybe dental records if it's possible, or the bones? Is there any way to determine age?
Yes, absolutely. And this is where a forensic anthropologist is going to be really important. We have two that work in our office, PhDs, who teach me so much on a daily basis about just how they make these determinations. So femur length is going to be important. They're going to measure those bones. They're going to make sure that any part of that skeletal remain that they find, that they try to put that body together as anatomically correct as possible. And then they'll start getting their information from there. So again, the measurements of those bones, not only just the femur length, but also head circumference and those different things, basing those anthropology measurements, those are going to be very important in terms of assessing them and comparing them to what someone's age could be for the measurements that they find. So again, I always refer to forensic anthropologists on that, and they're going to need quite a few if they do get to a point where they're going to do excavation, because you don't want to lose any evidence. You can't just dig it up. It has to be done very carefully, methodically, and it's a very time-intensive process.
And can you just elaborate a little bit more on the dental records, what may or may not be available there?
So whenever we look at dental records, we look at the shape of the jaw. We look for any fillings, any cavities, any bridge work, anything that may be present, braces. For example, they come from someplace. So again, they're useless if we don't know a potential identity of the person, because we would have to be able to go to that dental office and subpoena those records and say, hey, could you please give us the dental records for this person so that we can compare what we have found with these skeletal remains. Again, I think TV sometimes tricks us into thinking that we can just use dental records and all of a sudden we can find out everything we need to know about a person. But you have to have a possible identity for someone before you just go digging through dental records.
Well, let's say there's a crown or a filling or braces. There's no way to extract DNA from that?
Sometimes there is, but you have the femur bone, which is going to give you a lot more information. So any of the bones, you can get DNA from them, but that femur bone is going to have the best, and that's usually what we utilize. They cut a little window into the bone, and that's usually what's utilized for DNA and those purposes. So again, that larger bone is going to have more information.
What happens, again, we're speculating here, but assuming there are bodies here for a moment, if they're buried with items, I'm not saying that there would be ID, but if they're buried wearing clothing, would any of the clothing or materials that were buried with them, would that remain at that point? What have you seen in your experience? I'm not, because obviously if you're dealing with somebody who's nude, right, that's kind of what we're talking about. But if they were buried with articles of clothing or items, talk to me about the ability of that to be preserved and the ability to extract DNA or other forensic material from it.
No, there's definitely the possibility of extracting DNA and other items. You have to think hairs. People often don't think about your hair sheds. Other fibers get transferred during burial process. Most people are not experienced criminals. And that's what people fail to realize. Most people have not committed these types of crimes before. And so they make a lot of mistakes in the process. Again, what kind of resources they had access to, I don't know. And again, I don't know anything about this case. I'm simply commenting on the possibility that bodies are on this land. And so for me, for my office, when we've had skeletal remains partially buried or buried for a long time, and we've done the ground penetrating radar and found what we needed to find, we remove those skeletal remains very carefully. So even the area, the dirt around the body, we're going to preserve a lot of that as well and take samples from it, because it can sometimes give you great information. So there is the possibility that very valuable information can be obtained from what was buried with that person. And usually what we see in our line of work is when people bury someone, they bury their stuff with them. So the DNA from their things, if they put something in someone's mouth, it could possibly have saliva on it, which again has DNA. Hair, just because the skeletal remains are there, it doesn't mean that the hair goes away. Sometimes we find skeletons that still have hair attached. So again, these are things that could be very helpful in determining the identity of this person, but it could also give us pertinent information about who may have buried this person. Like you said, like hair of someone else. So just to be clear, hair can stay for quite some time, even if buried underground? Yes, it can. I mean, we've seen this with excavations from around the world and looking at people from the supposed Neanderthal, era. They have found hair. And so, again, that gives you a lot of information. And hair retains things. It retains things like drugs. It retains nutritional information sometimes. So, again, anything that's with that body, they're going to want to excavate this in the most careful way possible. I cannot stress this enough, that they cannot just go in there just digging and doing it very roughly. It needs to be layer by layer by layer, and it is a very time-intensive process. Shout out to all of the forensic anthropologists out there, because their work, especially on a case like this, is going to be so vital. What would it take for an excavation to be ordered in something like this? In your experience, when you've seen cases, I mean, there's one thing to have this right now uncorroborated account, but obviously they're taking it seriously. They're trying to look into it and see what they can find. In your experience, what would it take for them to go around the property, to excavate, to use ground penetrating devices to try to find a body? What would it take? Well, usually it takes that someone is missing and they have a possible location for this missing person. I know here in Richland County, we receive calls all the time. Hey, we need help. We have a tip that this missing person may be in this well, or they may be in this part of this 40-acre piece of land. And we will work with other agencies to utilize their technology to see if this is a possibility that someone is there. And then we have cases like the case of Adriana Laster, who they were just digging in the landfill and bones were found. So again, were bones found? Is there some sort of suspicion that there are missing persons on this property? So usually it just takes someone leaving a tip or giving information that could be related to a missing person for them to go and start digging. But again, they are going to need technology to even begin looking through all of this land, because there's just so much of it. How do you find which section? Are they going to go section by section and do a grid kind of dig? I don't know, but it's going to take a lot of logistics. And how long would that take if they went section by section using ground penetrating devices? I mean, how quickly can you get a hit? Weeks, months. For an area that is known to possibly have a buried person, that can take a couple of hours. But for the amount of land that these researchers and that these investigators are looking at, this could take weeks in order to pinpoint an area. So they may have to have multiple devices out there trying to find what is possibly a grave. Dr. Nada Rutherford, this is a fascinating discussion. We are obviously in the early preliminary stages of this, but I wanted to have you on just to give us something to think about as we're trying to understand this allegation. And now that there's an investigation into this property, how can I not talk about it? But again, really interesting things to think about. So we'll see what happens. But doctor, thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. We're also up on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.
Don't wait. Click the link in the description and start browsing safely with CyberGhost VPN. Stay private, stay secure, unlock global content. Get CyberGhost VPN now with 84% off plus 4 months free, risk-free with a 45-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description and start protecting your digital life today.